It's the Blues Rock Show with Pete Francis and Willie Witten.
Welcome to the Blues Rock Show. Pete Francis alongside Willie Witten. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode of the Blues Rock Show. All right, Willie, we got some big news to lead off this week's edition of the Blues Rock Show. After 21 years, John Mayer has announced he is leaving Columbia Records. My question for you, Willie, does an artist like John Mayer or an artist with such a huge following like that need a record label in 2022?
Well, I'm going to quickly touch on something that's a little bit different. I can't believe it's been 21 years. I still remember when Room for Squares came out. I think I was at the end of high school. I mean, that was a long time ago. But to your question that you actually asked me, I don't think they need a label at all. If you're that big, I don't know. And this is not a rhetorical question. This is a real question, because I don't know. I don't know what a label gets you at that point when you're that big. What does a label get that you have to give to them in return that you couldn't do with a micro team? Now, because if you're John Mayer, you know, you're going to be touring, you're going to be recording. There's a lot of things you're going to be doing. So I'm not saying you won't have anyone in your corner, but you got to imagine Columbia takes a decent slice of pie from his monthly nut. So I don't know why you do that. Pete, what do you think? I mean, if you're John Mayer, wouldn't you have done this like 5 years ago?
Well, so his contract just expired or is expiring, which is why this decision has come about. So he's not re-upping his contract. His contract is just expiring. So that's where the decision comes into play. But at this point, an artist like John Mayer, does he need a major record label like that anymore? I don't think so, because if you look at John Mayer's following on social media, he's already got this massive audience. So as long as John Mayer has a very good team in place around him that can still help him, I don't think he needs a record label. Now, that is very important that he has the right management, the right team around him to keep things going and keep that momentum going. But he does have a very huge following on social media. And when you build up that huge following, you can get your music out there so people buy your music or stream your music or whatever you want them to do with your music. You know, I think John Mayer has that in place, so I don't think it affects him too much. Now, Will, you asked, what does an artist today benefit from a major label like that?
At all.
I think there's a couple things. If you take an artist like say, Gary Clark Jr., right? He's on Warner Brothers. Well, what advantage would he have having his music on Warner? Well, a company like that also makes movies. So Gary Clark Jr., he's gotten his music into movies, TV shows, commercials, things like that. I think maybe that's one of the areas where a major label can still help artists, getting some of that mainstream exposure that would be really, really difficult to attain if you didn't have a major label. So I still think in some ways, major labels like that can still give artists a bit of a leg up. But I think once you reach a certain point, like a John Mayer has, that no, you don't really need a major record label behind you.
Yeah, Pete, I think you brought up something that I didn't really think of. I think your sync, your licensing of your music, that definitely is a place where a label can help. And it sort of fits into one of those old-fashioned ways of making money, one being the side of live performance, the other being the side of selling albums or discs or tapes and sync licensing. As we know, we talk about it all the time, the streaming game isn't very much fun. So this is a way where you can generate some money. And you're right, you're probably going to struggle as an artist, if you're not a John Mayer, with getting your music into a TV serial, into a commercial, into a movie. But if you take that away, there's a part of me that still feels that I don't know how much the label takes. I don't know what their cut of the pie is. But with social media becoming such a do-it-yourself, and it is such a big medium, I don't know, because think about this, Pete. If you're a small artist, you're not going to get picked up by one of the big three. So if you're really too big to make a benefit, and if you're too small to get notice, like I feel like these labels are going to get squeezed from both sides because of the way that they operate. That's just me just sort of throwing stuff against the wall. But I don't see it so much as them being nearly as important as they were even 10 years ago. So I don't know.
I think early on in your career, I think it can help you a ton. But once you really build up the audience, and as long as you have those really large social media accounts and things like that, it's a lot easier also to get your music distributed today and for people to hear it.
Right.
So
yeah,
it's really not that hard. An artist can do a simple Google search. And I think pretty much most artists are going to figure out, okay, how to get on Spotify and all those other different things. So, I mean, it's not that difficult anymore to get that sort of distribution. Although, again, with the major labels, if you do want to get on radio, those major labels have the big money. They can help you do that. Again, though, in a genre like blues rock, which we cover here at Blues Rock Review, these artists are not going to be on the radio anyways. Even Joe Bonamassa, who's massively, massively huge, here in the United States, you don't hear Joe Bonamassa on the radio.
Almost, I can't remember the last time. So you're right. So sync in radio, yes, the label still helps you. But yeah, things have changed and they're going to keep changing too.
Yeah, so we recently put a question out on Blues Rock Review's Facebook page. And that question was, who is the most underrated guitarist today? So, Willie, when you think about underrated guitar players, do you have a couple that come to mind?
I do. And I'll start with one that I mention all the time. And it's not just because she's a hometown girl, but I think Joanna Connor. I think that choice. I just, the way that she plays is so fiery, so unique. So that's going to be in the blues rock sort of realm. Another guy I'd throw out there is maybe a dark horse for this, but he's put out a couple of these covers albums, which I think really sort of highlights his style of playing. I've really enjoyed Eric Johansson.
Yeah, and he just put out a new live album.
Exactly. I think he's coming into his own. He's taking some risks that other people maybe don't do until later in their career. But I think he's coming into his own. And then it's not a blues rock guy. The last person I'm going to throw out there is I'm going to throw out a name, Jose Gonzalez. He's much more acoustic. He just has a way of playing guitar that is different. It sounds different than anyone else, which I really appreciate. He's done some work with other people. He was in a band called Junip for a while. So those would be, I mean, I could keep going, but those are the first three that come to mind. Pete, do you have a similar three run of people that don't get heard but need to be?
Well, I would definitely agree with you. All of those that you mentioned, definitely underrated artists. One that comes to mind is Eric Steckel, who's out of California. Super, super underrated player. I mean, if you've ever heard this guy play, he just shreds. He's a monster player, really fantastic. More people need to hear him play. Now, we're kind of looking at some of these comments on this Facebook post, and one of the popular comments on here, or popular artists mentioned, was Philip Sayce, and I completely agree. We both know Philip is a monster player, but he still deserves more attention. More people should know about him, especially here in the United States.
Exactly. And I only didn't mention him just because I felt he was such a shoo-in for an underrated player. So if that makes any sense, I know.
Yeah. So there was a comment here that said Philip Sayce, he's getting some of the recognition he deserves, but I feel that people are not putting him up there with Bonamassa, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, and Eric Gales. He's still underrated. Which I would agree with that. He does not get as much attention as some of those other guys. And really, when you think about Eric Gales, it's only really been in the last year or two that he's been getting more attention. Right. So, yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Taking a look at some of these other comments on here. Let's see some of the other ones that are getting some reaction. Tab Benoit. We recently had our top 10 Tab Benoit songs on Blues Rock Review. Greg Koch, that's another one. I would definitely agree with that one. Walter Trout, that one's getting a lot of likes. Obviously, Walter has been fantastic for years. But if you go walk down the street and you ask the average person, hey, have you ever heard of Walter Trout? Probably a lot of people are going to say no.
I go one step further with that.
No, really, Willie, it kind of comes down to what is your definition of underrated?
And
because someone could be not underrated within the the blues rock world, but this is a very niche,
Yeah.
tight knit community. But if it's just the everyday mainstream, then yes, a guy like Walter Trout would be super underrated.
I think, and all I was going to say when you said if you go down the street and ask if people have heard of Walter Trout, I think if Walter Trout walked down the street and asked people if they had heard of Walter Trout, and that's nothing against Walter. I mean, I love him. I did a list of his a year and a half ago for his top 10 songs. I think he's phenomenal, but I just don't think a lot of people, even if they've heard of him, I don't think they put a face to a name.
So like Anthony Gomes, here's another one. Someone said Anthony Gomes, and that's got a lot of likes. That's another good example of that.
Right.
Where I think Anthony Gomes, he's carved out a very nice niche for himself within the blues rock world. But again, if you're just asking random person on the street, hey, have you heard of Anthony Gomes? Because you ask a lot of people on the street, hey, have you heard of Joe Bonamassa? Yeah. Have you heard of Kenny Wayne Shepherd? I don't know. They might have heard the song Blue on Black, but they might not know. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a really interesting world that blues rock lives in.
Right.
Because the people that know, they know, right?
Yeah.
But the mainstream audience, people under 30, did they know who any of these people are? I mean, it's
a couple.
Yeah, maybe a few, but
yeah.
So I think those are all good choices. And then a couple other ones that come to mind. I think Josh Smith.
Yep.
Very underrated. People in the guitar community know who he is. Kirk Fletcher is another one I think very underrated. Ariel Posen, we've had him on the Blues Rock show before. I think he's super underrated. And I think with him, he has a sound that is pretty accessible too. And I think given an opportunity, he could have some more widespread sort of success if he kind of got in front of the right people. I think he's fantastic, really talented guitar player and a really strong songwriter as well. Really.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's funny that we speak about Ariel Posen and we think about John Mayer, and I'm the type of guy who thinks, well, if John Mayer can be this big, why isn't Posen this big? And so that almost brings us back to the label, or if you fall in with the right people. It's weird. The music community is weird. I think we all can agree on that. But those are I like some of the readers' choices. I think they make a lot of sense. I can't believe I forgot Walter Trout. I would have put him in there. So yeah, thank you, whoever put that in the comments. Thank you for reminding me about a guy that I love listening to. So
yeah, another one that comes to mind, Ryan McGarvey. He's fantastic as well. So definitely super underrated guitar player.
So Pete, the last thing I want to bring up, and we don't have to belabor it because I feel like anytime we have a show, we end up talking about them. Spotify is considering lowering their required length of song for it to be considered a song so that you can get a click as an artist and get paid. All right. Right now that limits 30 seconds. And this came about because a band was displeased with this rule that their songs wouldn't count. So they recently released on Spotify, and Pete, I'm not making this up, an album with 1,000 songs all around 30 seconds in length. Pete, what do you make of this?
I think that's kind of ridiculous, Willie. But if you think about artists, say, who do blues rock, right? There's a valid point there. If you're putting out songs that are 6 or 7 minutes long compared to 2.5 or 3 minutes,
right?
You're not going to get credit for as many streams.
Right.
However, 30-second songs, I don't like that at all. I think that's kind of TikTokifying music, which I don't think is good for music. I mean, are you going to listen to a 30-second song over and over and over again? It just seems very disposable to me.
It does. I feel like there was a little bit of a point to this band that did this, and I forgot their name because honestly, and it's nothing against the band. This is a valid artistic and also business statement, but I don't have a ton of interest because there's also 1,000 of them. That's a long album of 30-second, essentially blurbs of music. But it sounds like Spotify's leaning towards calling those songs. And so are we
to me, those are more like ideas than songs.
Yes, vignettes, or the little things like on Eric Gale's recent album, he had 3 little segues, little small little bits, little tiny jams. I don't know. Are we going to wake up, Pete, in 5 years from now and there's never going to be a song over 2 minutes again?
Ooh, hate to think about that, Willie.
Yeah. Well,
it really is kind of like the TikTok effect.
Right.
Where like nothing can be longer than 30 seconds.
Nope, not at all. Not if you want those clicks. So I guess we'll leave it at that. Maybe we can get a couple of clicks for this show, Pete. What do you think?
Yeah, what do you guys think? Let us know down in the comments what you think about some of the topics we discussed today. Do you think major artists like John Mayer need a record label in 2022? Who are some of your most underrated guitar players out there today? We really want to know. So let us know down in the comments section below. And what do you think about these 30-second songs? That's pretty interesting too. Let us know down in the comments section below. That's going to wrap up this week's edition of the Blues Rock Show. For Willie Witten, I'm Pete Francis. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.